Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us. This is the bottom line. On the bottom line, we look at the business in the country, whatever that has some level of concern with employment, with aviation, with trade, with everything that supports the economy of the country. You want to tune in every Monday evening, 8 o'clock, and we get to digest the entire economy of the country. Tonight, we are focusing on a very special area. On Wednesday, the Minister of Finance, Honorable Ken Oforiatta, is supposed to be on the floor of Parliament presenting to us the 2024 budget. We have the opportunity to be asking questions, and I'm sure that you may want to put up your concern, your expectation, your anticipation on our number, which will be scrolling on the screen pretty shortly, about what do you think should be captured in the budget. As usual, the politics of it will be played out right after when the budget is read by both sides of the House. The majority in the House, the minority in the House as well. They will be talking about their sides or their bids to what has been read. And usually you want to expect the usual antics of a very bad budget being touted by the opposition NDC and a very good budget being touted by the ruling NPP, of course. When the other is also in government, it is the same. But for us here, in the world of business, we don't do politics. We want to have a very sound analysis of the numerous taxes that have been imposed on businesses, on the growth of SMEs in the country, of the employment that is being created so far, and that is going to be created by the budget that is to be presented. And that's where our focus is tonight. I am very much aware that the Ministry of Finance is somewhere in an encampment currently going through the nitty-gritties of whatever they need to put to the budget to be presented on Wednesday, 11 a.m. on the floor of Parliament. For us here, we're engaging business experts tonight to look at what the macroeconomy, the microeconomy has been so far, at least for the past one economic year, and what their projections are, especially in the election year 2024. You want to stick and stay with us? This is the bottom line. My name is Kwesi Afriye. We are coming your way live from our studios here at Rage in Accra. When we come back, we get straight into our discussions, and you will have the opportunity to share your concerns as well. Stay with us. Right, so you're welcome back from the break. I'm actually currently reviewing a document by the KPMG on their pre-budget survey report and what Ghanaians actually think about what the budget should look like and what they have gone through over the last one economic year and what they're actually anticipating. In the course of the discussion, I'll be looking at some of them. Major of the issues include galamsey, climate financing, growing awareness of environmental, social, and governance issues, SDG integration into budget process, top policy initiatives of government. That's campaign initiatives of the government. You have fiscal policy issues as well, and there is a retrospect to the previous year, and so on and so forth. We'll come to the summary and the number of taxes that have been stated. Let me quickly introduce to you my guests, and I'll introduce to you also a statement that has been released, or a conference that has been carried out by one of my guests, and we'll begin from there, what they think the budget should look like. And I think that they are actually the crust of the economy, but let me go straight to them, and I'll begin with the man in the studio. I just told him that I haven't seen him in a minimum of about 6-7 years. He used to be on our show. We used to go to him, report from his entire businesses and a lot of things. And we used to go for rice as well. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us. John Nawuni is the executive chairman of the Food and Beverages Association of Ghana. I remember that during Christmas, we will be calling on you and chasing you for rice. but it's been a long time. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
I hope you're doing very well.
Very
It's
well.
been so long.
Well, I'm around. And we are going higher and higher by the grace of God.
And how is business treating you?
Well, business is quite okay. Just that during the program, we'll highlight some of the difficulties. Even though it's not peculiar to Ghana, it's a global phenomenon. But we'll digest and then see how we can diagnose the issues and then prescribe the solutions within our remit.
I'll come to the press statement and conference that you have put out, talking about the nuisance taxes and so on and so forth. But we are going to have, I don't know if we have her already online, Doris Ahiati is a fellow of the Institute of Bankers. She's been with us in the studio a couple of times, and she's an expert in the area of the economy, banking, financing, and so on and so forth. And we'll be getting to her live on Zoom to also be talking about the expectations of the banking sector entirely, maybe the financial sector, if I should expand it to that direction. She will be talking about that as well. And we are particularly interested, I understand that she's online. So Doris, if you can hear me, good evening and thank you very much for joining us. I can see you if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Good evening to you. I'm sorry I couldn't join you in studio. I had a long day that just culminated in me joining here.
Yes, I understand. You have always been with us in the studio, so I know that if you had your way, you would definitely have been with us. But let me begin straight with what you think, and I'll come to John in the studio and get back to you. But generally, what are you expecting? Minister is supposed to be on the floor of Parliament on the 15th. That's on Wednesday. Let me check if the date is actually the 15th. On Wednesday, yes, exactly. 15th day of November 2023 to present to us next year's budget. What are you expecting?
Thank you very much. So I think the number one thing that we are expecting is to see some stimulation of growth in the real sector of the economy. We are mindful of the fact that we are still under an IMF program going into the year 2024. And we are also mindful that it's going to be an election year. And in the past, historically, we've seen the excesses happen. And that notwithstanding, we are expecting that there will be some controls that will be presented in the budgets that will be read, especially in the area of the expenditure, that we will not throw caution to the wind, but we would introduce measures that are convincing enough to bridle the extent to which we are going to ramp up the expenditure side of our budget. And then on the revenue side as well, we are not expecting a budget that comes to make almost preposterous projections in the area of revenue, but we want to see more realistic estimates in the area of the revenue projection so that shortly down the line, we won't have a need to come back and revise what we have projected for the year. Now, what that does is if you have projected an overambitious and unrealistic revenue, you are likely to also outline expenditure for the same period that may not be funded. And assuming that you've already taken the initiative to undertake those expenditure and the revenues are not coming in and you have to come and do downward revision, then you are compelled to borrow to support that expenditure. So we don't want to see this happening. On the revenue side, we want more realistic estimates. On the expenditure side, we also want to see a little more discipline being demonstrated in some cuts in areas that we don't really have to spend, and also prioritizing and rationalizing the expenditure towards projects that will contribute to a multiplier sort of impact, especially in the real sector. And examples that will come to mind in that sector would be support for the real sector in the area of agric. The agric sector has been fairly stable, and we have seen quite some stable contribution. We want to see maybe completion of the Accra-Kumasi road project. the Apatema motorway, so that, and also maybe some suburban railway system that makes it possible to haul food from the hinterland, from where it's being produced through the city, so that we don't have so much of the delays that we see and the inefficiencies that we suffer, the lost productivity through the traffic that we currently have to deal with. So I think this broadly is one category of the expectations that we have of the budget. But very importantly, we also see that the development of the current year has taken a toll on the financial sector. I'm making reference to the DDEP and how this has impacted the posture of the banks and also the capital markets players in their ability and interest in financing the real sector. Interest rates are so unsustainably high. It's not attractive to the real sector to borrow at these rates. And then there's also the competition coming from the public sector. You also see that as a result of deterioration in the non-performing loan, it's risen past 20% at the last check. This poses a risk to the sustainability of bank capital, because the real sector mostly are where the banks are exposed, and they are not able to generate growth so that they can service their obligations to the bank. And so there's that threat that bank capital buffer may be shaved in the coming season. So we want to see a stimulation of the real sector. And this stimulation will rebuild the confidence of the financial sector so that they can support the real sector to also undertake activities that generate employment and improve the lot and contribute to the signals of stability and growth that we are beginning to see in the economy so far. I think this, in the nutshell, would be my expectation.
All right. So thank you very much. I'll come back to you. I've noticed some of the points that you have stated. Most importantly, the stimulation of the real sector to have effect on the macroeconomy and so on and so forth. But let me come to you, John. You had made a specific call that you don't need nuisance taxes in 2024. It's a business year for you. You need to grow your businesses. You are coming out of gradually, I mean, not entirely, although, of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, of the impact of the Russian-Ukrainian war, and so on and so forth. So they should provide you with a conducive environment to grow and not new taxes.
Yeah, very much true. My expectation is that, or our expectation is that, though we are 2024 is an election year, the budget shouldn't be a political budget. It should actually be a very realistic budget that will reflect the expectations or the aspirations of the general public. We have said over and over in the last couple of weeks that the business sector is not doing well, the private sector is not doing well. And if I say the private sector, I refer to generally the agricultural sector is not doing well, the manufacturing sector is not doing well, and generally the service sector. Generally, the private sector that is seen as the engine of growth of the country is not doing well. And this can be attested to the mass level of unemployment we have in the country. Unemployment levels that are at a very threatening levels. And generally, it cannot just be ascribed to this particular government. That has been the trouble in this country and over the years. And we must come out with a budget that will seek to kick-start some bit of growth or bit of activity and in the private sector, whereby generally the attestation that is the engine of growth, it can begin to live to its core. If you take, for instance, let me say, the manufacturing sector, and when His Excellency the President came to office, he talked about the fact that we are moving this country from Georgesburg to from Godsby economy, and that meant in
Well,
economy.
we're moving from taxation to
No.
production.
They said we will move from taxation to production. That is one level. And they are also moving us from the Gadsby economy to something else. And in economics or in development economics, we tend to understand that you are using manufacturing as the anchor of your development. So manufacturing sector will lead the growth and the development of the country. And if you say so, you want to see that there are a lot of policies that will come out in a manner that will support the manufacturing sector. For instance, the environment must be very conducive. Taxes must be conducive. Electricity and utilities generally must be convenient for the manufacturing sector to start. But when you look at it currently, the cost of manufacturing in this country is very, very, very high. It's uncompetitive. The Ghanaian manufacturing sector is not competitive in the SAP region, not to talk about globally.
Even in the sub-region, even in West Africa,
in
it's
West
not
Africa,
competitive.
we cannot be competitive.
So, you mean, is it from the cost
you
of
look at the-
production or?
Yes, the cost of production, and that's what I'm getting to.
So
If
you
you
mean
look
that
at
if we compare ourselves, for example, to Togo, to Nigeria, to
If you look-
Burkina Faso, to Ivory
Burkina
Coast,
Faso, to look at Ivory Coast, listen, a couple of weeks ago, no, not a couple of weeks, I think 2 weeks or the last week, we had the Ghana Prosperity, Mutual Prosperity Dialogue. The finance minister organized that.
yes.
We were all at Moving Peak. I gave our concerns with the private sector. I spoke concerning that. Afterwards, the chief executive of the GI, the Ghana Investment Promotion Council, my friend, good friend, UFI Grant, attested to some of the things that I said that the environment, the private sector is kind of toxic. And he said this, that he was returning from abroad. He was in the business class. The business class in the flight was full. The first class was equally full, he presumed. And then he said, oh, well, that means that business is doing well. People are, and this were all, this sector that was filled with investors. So when he got to Kotoka, only 3 of them got down in Kotoka. And then the rest didn't get down. So he was
so
kind
they
of
were
worried.
actually transiting.
Transit. And then he found
Yeah.
out from a couple of them that where were they going? They said they were going to Cote d'Ivoire because Ghana was not a good environment for business again. This is live testimony. And so what happens is that if you go to the Ghanaian market now, you will find out that for rice, for most of the provisions goods, fast-moving commodities, they are French-labeled commodities. These are goods labeled in French that do not pass our labeling requirements, and yet they are in our market. How did they come into our market? They came through unapproved routes. Most of these investors are moving to Cote d'Ivoire. They are moving to the Togo and all that. Indeed, if you look at the Ghanaian port, it has become so dry that in a couple of months ago, the Director General organized a meeting with stakeholders like
Yes,
us.
I heard about that.
Exactly. To
About
find out
why
why
there are no fleets coming
fleets
in.
coming in. He was very worried, and that was a genuine concern. Why? Because of the level of taxation that has kind of closed down the doors of the country and shifted businesses, that those businesses that are even in the country have now moved to Togo. They are routing their goods through Togo, routing their goods through Cote d'Ivoire. Recently, there was a policy that the finance minister came out to say, let me say GRA, they talked about the fact that oil, that's cooking oil, all those imports should come through the port. Why? Because they noticed that most of those things are coming through unapproved routes and coming through Cote d'Ivoire, coming through Togo. And that tells you that your private sector, there is something equally wrong, because we say that Ghana is the gateway to business. In His Excellency, the President Kufuor, they talk about the golden age of business. Where have all that gone to? So the private sector is not doing well. The manufacturing sector is riddled with so many taxes. Look at the growth and sustainability tax that has been introduced. It affects the manufacturing sector, even though it affects many other sectors. Growth and sustainability tax, that is, after you have made your profit, so to say gross profit, they will tax it 2.5% or 5% or 10%, depending on whichever category that you fall in. And then after they have taken that tax, then you will also now be taxed on your corporate, your profit on tax. That's just too much. Then you talk about VAT increase from 12.5 to 15%. That has increased the cost of the product. Then you talk about excise tax. That were on a couple of goods have also now been expanded to cover beverages, alcohol, water, and other stuff.
Okay.
This has also affected. Then you have electricity tariffs increase quarterly. Then you have COVID levy that is still standing in our tax books. So we have a whole lot of these things, and general import duties are still very high. Skyrocketing. Try to import a vehicle, and you will see that if you bought a vehicle like $40,000 in the US, and I have tried that, the amount of money, dollars that I bought that vehicle in the US, I paid almost more than that at the Tema port.
For duty, just
for the duty. It's as if it's a punishment to bring it. Yet your industry locally is not doing well. You find out that those little vehicles that they have manufactured that the Uber people are using, you find out the cost of it, $18,000 for a vehicle. And how many of the people that in the
will be able to buy an $18,000 car?
And that all borders on taxation. You see, so the private sector, if it's not doing well, if you look at the level of unemployment, I don't know how many, in fact, I don't have the figure at hand, how many universities we have in the country. And every year, graduates are coming out.
We have about 400,000 graduates, at least a minimum of 250,000 graduates coming out of the tertiary institutions.
Leaving out the polytechnics and then all that. The government is the biggest spender in an economy, but the government is not the biggest employer. The private sector is the biggest employer. And so for any economy to do well, the private sector must do well. So when you have private sector players coming out to complain, for instance, in that mutual prosperity dialogue, all the panelists that they put together, everybody complained that the private sector was not doing well. The private sector business was toxic. Everybody, and I don't want to mention businesses' name, that those that they put on the panels, first panel, second panel, and the like, and all of those who spoke were there. Everybody, it was agreed that the private sector of the country is not doing well. So we are expecting that in the coming budget, the government must, having diagnosed these issues, the government must come out with policies, not necessarily policies that will just say, oh, well, and they have removed this tax, they have done this, they have done, so that it can encourage people to vote for them. No.
So not a vote budget.
You
are not expecting a vote buying budget.
A vote buying budget, but we are looking at a budget.
A business support budget.
A budget that will reflect the problems of what? The country.
Have you, by any chance, you practicalize all of the things that we have been thinking about? Have you by any chance submitted this to the ministry?
Yes, we have.
The groups, the associations, I mean, your association is a very key association in the management of the economy. You have stated to us that you have met the Minister of Finance in one or two meetings, the Ministers of Trade and so on and so forth. Have you made this known to them? Do you think that they are capturing it in the budget?
We've done a written proposal or submission to the Minister of Trade. We gave a 1 to the Minister of Finance, and even the head of the tax policy unit. I do believe that they have, even though they haven't acknowledged receipt, we're not expecting acknowledgement of receipt. But
you haven't acknowledged receipt of your work?
No, but I have submitted, and this does not reflect like my individual thing. Because, for instance, in one of the presentations that I did a table, and the table reflected the price of the product before tax and the price of the product after tax. It was from one of those things that the Honorable Minister of Trade went and to the Chamber of Commerce and then said that was responding that we should reduce our prices and that kind of stuff. But when you look at the table, I came out with that table as simple as that. Taking cognizance of the taxes that we pay in the country, or consumers for that matter pay. And you realize that evaporated milk, a tin, the cost without the tax is 8.5 cedis. The cost with the tax is 15.5 cedis. Cement was 58 cedis, and the cost is 90 cedis. And I did not sit down to conjure these things.
You mean cement that we use?
A bag of cement.
A bag of cement, maybe a 32.5 area or
Whatever it
42.5
is.
area. If it's costing 90 cities,
Uh-huh.
the actual cost
The actual
without
cost
tax,
could have been that tax is like 58 cities or
58
so,
cities. And we are buying it for 90
cities,
92, 95.
95. A bag of rice, and I'm directly involved. A bag of rice, landed cost is like 400 cities. Go to the market, it's like 750 cities.
After tax.
After taxation.
But that includes your profit as well.
That includes a margin of profit, and the profit margin cannot be more than 10-15%. The profit on rice is very, very, very small. You see, rice or generally, we are talking about rice. The rice seller relies on volumes rather than bigger profit.
Okay.
The rice seller relies largely on volumes rather than profit. So if you could find that somebody selling the bag of rice and the profit on it is just like 5 cedis. Just like cement, they rely on volumes rather than bigger, higher profits. So you look at rice, 400 cedis landed, all the taxes, you are talking about 750. Chicken, a box of chicken, you look at the landed cost, it's like 170. When you go to the final cost, it's like 350 cedis. Even look at
That's more than double the price. That's more than double the price of the landed cost.
Let me just deviate a little more from the imported ones. Look at local chicken. Talking about chicken, a chicken of about 1.2 kilos is 130 cedis. How many Ghanaians, fresh as it is, tastier as it is than the imported one, how many Ghanaians can afford to buy the local chicken at 130 cedis and cook every day? And for a family like my family, I will require one literally every day. So take 130 cedis times 30. So generally,
it's really scary.
The taxes that the Ghanaian pays is very high. We are not saying that the government must reduce so that the revenue, we are very mindful. I am an economist, and I'm very mindful about the fact that the government cannot conjure money or go and print money just anyhow, just for development. We are the same people crying for the fact that we need hospitals.
We need roads. We need
and all that.
infrastructure and so on.
The unfortunate thing even about Ghana, even if you have to deviate a little about it, is that Ghana government doesn't actually drive the development. It's the people that drive development.
So you hold on there. Hold on there for me. I mean, you have practicalized the whole issue, but Doris had given us, I think, a summary of all of this, saying that we need to look at the real sector and how we will be able to transition or let that reflect in the budget. And Doris, if you can hear me, I'm sure you've been listening to John, and he is from industry. He gives practical examples of what you had been talking about. Is that the case?
Yes, definitely. This is what we have seen, references that he's made to the cost. Now, the interesting thing for me is when you talk about the extent to which industry is being taxed. I think those of us that track the quarterly performance of macroeconomic indicators, we've seen industry sector contract for 3 consecutive quarters. And for the manufacturing sector that Mr. Awuni makes reference to, as well as construction sector and trade sector, we've also actually seen negative growth being recorded for more than 2 quarters. I think the last 3 quarters, these sectors, subsectors under the industry sector have registered negative growth. And so the interesting thing to note here is that while as a government you may be interested in taxation as a source of revenue, it's important that you don't lose sight of the sustainability aspect of it. If we tax these real sector players to such an extent that they collapse, then you curtail that revenue that you are enjoying through the tax revenue anyway, because those shops would have shut down. And we've already seen quite a number of businesses shut down, like he made reference. We've also seen institutions move out of the country and set up their shop just in our neighboring countries, Cote d'Ivoire and also Togo. And as we are doing that, reference to the ports, at the end of the day, it goes back to affect how much you are able to mobilize in tax revenue and import duty. So we really need to be mindful of how we are mobilizing tax revenues in a sustainable way. And I think this is what brings us back to the issue of how we are empowering and enabling the real sector to revive, to be productive one more time. And I like the fact that it's important for us to sit down and to see where their real challenges are. I think when it comes to haulage, reference was made to manufacturing, access to utilities, at what cost they are able to access to utilities, logistics for transportation, preservation, adding the value chain, value to the products that are being produced. We still have quite significant post-harvest losses coming from our agri sector. What measures, what policies can we put in place to encourage and to support them to be able to produce more? Beyond post-harvest losses, we've also had instances where some entities attempt to add value to their produce and then finding sustainable market to patronize their products becomes a burden. This could be an area that we could provide a platform that makes it easy so that the producer, whoever is adding value, doesn't have to carry the burden or the headache of finding the buyer for their products, but they can focus on what they do best, which might well be producing the product or the service and making it available. I believe that there are additional areas that we can also look. I think I touched on financing in my initial presentation. The fact that currently the private sector is also starved of critically needed financing. And they are starved because the banks, the commercial banks and the investment banks that should have the muscle to support them, that should provide the liquidity that they needed, are themselves crippled because of the DDEP. They don't have access to the liquidity that they could have used to support this sector. We still have a bit of time before the liquidity situation improves. But while we are there, what can we do in the area of interest rates? What can we do that will provide some signal that provides a bit of relief, some breathing room, so that the little available funding can be accessed at more realistic and should I say sustainable rate to the private sector. We also looking at government's continued borrowing. We still have quite a significant appetite. When you go for auctions week on week, you see that there's a significant government appetite that is competing with the private needs when it comes to accessing funding. So I think that's also an area where we need the government to rationalize and prioritize where they are directing their spending and where they can pull the brakes. I believe that there's a lot of discipline that can be exercised that will go a long way. For example, also channeling all expenditure through the gift mix, including bringing on board all the MDAs, could go a long way to make sure that some gaps are blocked. Opportunities for leakages where we don't have transparency that probably lead to overinflation or inefficiency in how revenues mobilized are being accounted for and how they are being channeled towards expenditure projects, that they are all synchronized on the gift mix system. And I believe that will go a long way to bring some efficiency in how the government is deploying its revenues mobilized through expenditure.
So John says we don't need an overambitious, in as much as the players in the industry are expecting some very conducive environment for their business to thrive. They don't need an overambitious budget, and what he terms as a vote-buying budget to set targets that would look as if, because it's an election year, and I'll go on also to ask you what you think will be the impact of the elections which are coming from historic trajectory on the budget which is supposed to be read on Wednesday.
Right, so let me start with my view on the budget and what we are likely to see when it comes to presentation in the budget on Wednesday. we have seen year after year. And indeed, a lot of the conversation we are having this evening and the suggestions, issues coming up, they are not new. But the will to actually take an action, and where we have taken action, to be consistent with the action so that it take roots and make a difference, is what has been lacking. For example, when it comes to revenue mobilization, we always talk about, can we find a way to broaden the tax net? Because we have just a percentage, a fraction of taxpayers that are bearing all this burden, averaging something like approaching 22% effectively. That's quite significant. And in some cases, we see that there's a little bit of a tax on tax happening there. Can we get more efficient with how it's mobilized, how we are accounting for the taxation? I think there may be an opportunity for us to also look in the area of business e-commerce online, businesses that currently may not be adequately taxed, so that we are not overburdening those that are already contributing. But like I said, we are looking out for a budget that is realistic. So this has a lot to do for the credibility of the government. We've had the 2023 budget that was presented, have gaps, the need to revise, and then very interestingly, how they will also account for performance against the benchmark, against the projections that they shared with us for 2023. It would also go a long way to make them credible in what they are estimating for the year 2024. And like I said, in elections year, we always have the excesses and the overrun. On this occasion, we have the IMF program underway. Hopefully, that will cause us to be a little more restrained in our approach. But that notwithstanding, I still am concerned that we might end up getting into the excesses. How are they going to go about this? There's a desire to retain, should I say, government for another term. And this may be the motivation. I'm not sure where there might be room, but there would be the temptation to finish off projects that may appear to appeal to the populace, so that they may direct their votes in a certain way that benefits their certain government. But be that as it may, we should not lose sight of the fact that we are increasingly dealing with an electorate that is more enlightened, an electorate that is more demanding, especially in the area of accountability. And so we can't just present anything and expect that tomorrow's voter is going to accept whatever it is. I believe that they are sensitive, they are enlightened enough to ask critical questions, and we shouldn't take that for granted in the kind of budget that we present for the year 2024 come this Wednesday. These are some of my thoughts.
Right. So, John, I'll come back to you. You were giving some startling statistics, and for me, it's quite dangerous. Looking at the figures, for example, the price of a bag of rice for 400 cedis ending up at over 700 cedis. That's serious. But kindly indulge me. I'll take a very quick break. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time. I'll take a very quick break. When I come back, I'll let you land on that, and then we'll go into how we expect the IMF also to impact the budget. Stay with us. We'll be right back. So you're welcome back from the break. This is still the bottom line. I still have some experts in the industry with me. One online, that's Doris here online, and then I have John also here in the studio. I'll come back to you, John. And we're just discussing that the figures are startling.
And what it points out is that, for instance, I don't want to even continue with that, but for the drinkers of beer, a bottle of beer is, with our tax, is 5 cedis, and with the tax, 11 cedis. Now, even this week, the beer companies have increased their prices, and nobody there say that, like, I sat down somewhere and conjure these things.
I mean, you are in the industry.
I
started by introducing the fact that we come to you for, right?
We spoke to the various players in the various sectors and asked them to give us this kind of data. And then they provided this primary data, and then we used. Now, basically, what it points out is that with this high level of taxation and culminating into high level of prices, it has affected the level of demand of the product. Whether it is an elastic product or an inelastic product, demand has been affected. So even though the government keeps on saying that, oh, they meet their revenue targets, indirectly, I tend to disagree. Look, they could have gotten more money if the taxes were a little lower. And there's general studies in economics. Economists have agreed that tax cuts, whether it is consumption tax, or corporate tax, income tax, or whatever level of tax, if the tax is reduced, then it increases compliance level and also will consequently increase the level of of revenue the government will mobilize. So indeed, if prices drop, the government will mobilize more money in terms of their revenue. They could actually get more money than they estimate. The fact of it is that now that the government is sending out GRA people to the offices of or companies to sit down at the doorsteps to take their taxes, shows that in fact, the whole level of taxation beats one of the canons of taxation. One of the canons of taxation that we learn in secondary school is that the tax must be convenient. Now, to the fact that people are not willing to pay, and you will have to literally force the tax from their hands, means that it is not convenient. And so when you get to that levels, then that means that we are at the level of unsustainability. So I would like to see the finance minister move his eyes from the issue of we have to generate revenue for development. I remember my A-levels economics teacher used to talk about, and consequently we used to talk about in economics in the short run and the long run. I said, okay, if you do this and in the long run for development, and then nobody's alive in the long run, who will enjoy the development? You see, so if the finance minister keeps on talking about we need money for development, and you don't keep an eye on the welfare, the cost of living, the standard of living of the people, then at the end of the day, you may be shooting yourself in the foot because the people you are looking for the money to do development will not even be alive to enjoy that level of development.
Let me quickly add, before I go to Doris, that we have the issue of the IMF, first tranche coming in. All of these that we are talking about is partly as a result of the devaluation of our local currency, which is the cedi against the major currencies, the pound, the dollar, and so on and so forth. If it stabilizes, there is anticipation that, of course, even though the taxes are there, prices will be a little stable. The rate at which will increase or may even come down. Are you expecting the IMF to impact the budget 2024?
Obviously, since the IMF came in, the economy has stabilized. You can find out that our currency has stabilized against the US dollar, the major trading currency in this country. It has stabilized. So if it does come in, it will still have an effect. But let me say, if you do general economic development, the study of the economic history or economic development of Africa, with all apologies, it has always been a cycle. IMF will come in, stabilize, and then go. IMF has never helped any African country for development, and that is a fact in economic development that students of economic development will know. So we may be happy that yes, IMF will come in and stabilize, but the real stabilization must come from all of us. So I look forward in the common budget a push for the digitization of the economy. That is a major area that this country can liberalize. We can begin to liberate ourselves. The digitization thing is something that we cannot compromise ourselves on. The level of corruption in this country is what is killing this country. When some of them set out of the whole money, this money is in this country. It is true the money is in the country, but the money is going to private pockets. Everybody in the government sector, indeed, has more or less, with all apologies, has privatized their decks. Give anybody a government uniform or a desk, and the desk is
they privatize it.
Privatized. If I say privatized, in the sense that you cannot get any file push in most of the government sectors without you paying money. And generally, this digitization thing that is going on, I think the common budget must also emphasize on that. It is the sure way to fighting corruption to a greater extent in this country. All of us have become so corrupt in this country that, given the opportunity, we tend to think about ourselves than thinking about the country. But generally, it is important for us to build a system than for us to think about individual prosperities.
All right. Important for us to build the system than to build individual prosperities. Doris, if you are still online, let me quickly come to you. There are about 3 or 4 points that I quickly would want you to touch on because of our time. Revenue mobilization and the fact that we need to expand the tax net because, as John says, the burden is on a few people, and then there is a consistent increment on that few people who are supposed to pay. We need to embark on massive digitization in a bid to expand or widen the tax net and get a lot more people to pay taxes. Put in measures that will reduce or prevent evasion of taxes, let people be compliant by reducing taxes and so on and so forth. He talks about taking away corruption, especially in the public sector, and that if that is done, we will be able to salvage the economy. And finally, you may want to add your thoughts on the IMF maybe stabilizing the economy. Briefly, then we can run on.
Okay. So thank you very much. I think on the subject of corruption, we are talking about leadership and the values that the people that we have entrusted with leadership responsibilities espouse, and their understanding of what leadership entails, which essentially is service being rendered to the people in the interest of the people and not seeking the selfish agenda of the people who are in leadership. And when we get this wrong, then we are likely to find ourselves hoarding and privatizing our desks, which are supposed to be used to drive the agenda of providing a certain quality of life for the masses that we have in the country. I believe that the conversation on leadership is something important as a leadership aspect as well that we need to look at right from the top. I know there have been efforts to try to address the issue, and oftentimes it's outsourced to people that are not the key decision makers. But when it comes to subjects like this, it's important that the final decision makers are involved and are at the table, and they are role modeling what we would like to see happening across the country when it comes to accountability that addresses the subject of corruption. I think the other area that you touched on, the IMF, and I agree with Mr. Awuni, that would sound like, imagine that you have a cancerous sore, and instead of doing some surgery and trying to take care of the infection in there, you just slap a band-aid on it and it looks on the outside like everything is okay. I think what we need is a certain fundamental restructuring of our economy so that we are able to address our persistent issues in a more sustainable way. IMF is a good short-term, like stopgap solution that works in the short term, but in the long term, you can't get any meaningful, sustainable solution to your fundamental economic issues through an IMF program. I think in the short term or immediate term, we have seen a certain sense of stabilization and maybe signals of growth that I alluded to, but even this is fragile. I think there were some numbers that I wanted to share. There were targets that had been set, for example, for where we wanted to get to when it comes to our growth target for year end. It was somewhere around 1.5%. And at the last check, we are crossing a little over 3%. We are not yet at the end of the year, but when the statistics looks like that, it means that you are going to end the year quite fairly well. When it comes to fiscal deficit as well, the target for the year end was something around 4.4. And so far, we are seeing something that is like 1.4%. So that's also quite positive. Mm-hmm. And these are thanks to the IMF program. But like I'm saying, they are short term. You've seen the stability in the CD against the foreign currency. Presently, we have made some of the submissions that should enable us get the release of the 530 million tranche from the World Bank. Now, this delay is already causing some simmering pressure, and I believe Mr. Awuni will attest to that, as well as those who are players in the market.
Yes.
We also have heard the news of the difficulty that the Cocoa Board is experiencing in raising its syndicated loan, which
Right.
year after year, and in my circles, we've had the debate as to why we don't have a fund, a more sustainable way to address this. But there is the need for us year after year to go cap in hand to find loans. And this time, because of the level of our credibility, we are not even attractive. You look at the losses that are coming. So for me, maybe more sustainable solutions to some of these issues, addressing the core fundamental issues of the economy, in addition to stimulating and supporting real sector.
Right.
For example, a number of the institutions state-owned, which are making heavy losses, can we consider having them offload the government ownership on the stock exchange?
Okay.
If they are viable, but currently non-profitable, can we explore these options?
All right.
So that they begin to operate with that level of transparency and accountability that we've seen private enterprises to espouse.
Okay. Right. So that is Doris Ahiati there. Doris, thank you very much. I'm sure we'll fall back on you next week. And of course, John, we may fall back on you when the minister comes to Parliament on Wednesday. By Monday, we'll still get back and see what exactly has happened. So Doris Ahiati is a fellow Institute of Bankers, and my very own John Awuni is the Executive Chairman, Food and Beverages Association of Ghana. They've helped us tonight to digest their anticipation and, of course, what is on the minds of a lot of Ghanaians across the length and breadth of the country, what they are thinking ahead of the budget reading on Wednesday. On Wednesday, we'll bring you a live feed from Parliament. You want to watch Metro TV, we'll bring you the detailed analysis on Wednesday itself from the political perspective and the business perspective as well. My name is Kwesi Efrie. Good evening.